stark difference from the Gambia I left 34 years ago.
If you talk about 34 years, probably the last half of that 34 years, the last 17 years were the most eventful years in terms of development in this country. Are you surprised that, well, that had happened only in a decade and a half?
I was impressed by the result. You know, part of the challenge for me during the years I was away is, like everyone else on the outside, I was hearing all of these contrasting perspectives.
Absolutely.
On one hand, I was hearing that the president, Yahya Jammeh, was a dictator, and they were comparing him to Kim Jong-il of North Korea. And they were saying that the people were just mindlessly following these mandated, tight, restrictive, and forced protocols and methods of response. But on the other hand was the reality of development. On the other hand, in the same circles but not at the same time, the same people who were blasting and condemning the leadership would be quietly articulating the reality of development. And that contrast I picked up on early, and created the necessity for me to come when I had an opportunity to come and see for myself what the reality was. Because you see, in the Bible, in the book of Matthew, it says, you can't call a tree good and its fruit evil. That only a good tree can produce good fruit. That an evil tree produces corrupt fruit. So when you look at the reality, we have good fruit produced in the Gambia. That's the reason why people are here. That's the reason why people are coming. That's the reason why the population is growing. That's the reason why the youth, the young people, have aspirations of educating themselves and doing things for their country and doing things for the family.
So the tree cannot be evil.
So if you have good fruit, it's a contrast, because it says that a good tree cannot produce corrupt fruit, and neither can a corrupt tree produce good fruit. So when we see the good fruit, the evidence of the good fruit is evidence that the leader is a good tree. Period. Period. And that's the way I internalized that reality.
But probably there was selective presentation of information about the Gambia. There was the good side of this country. It's just a matter of, picking it up and then putting it in.
No. It's not that simple.
It's not that simple.
It's not that simple. It's not that simple because...
Is it the context? What's absent here?
The context is a part of the problem, yes. But also, you know, you can only internalize. We can only internalize based on our experience and exposure. No one can draw conclusions or imagine beyond what is inspired by experience and exposure. And on the West, the West has been systematically sensitized against the realities that exist here. For example, you know, here we have an environment that is very respectful. Back when I was a youth in the 50s and 60s, in the African American communities, you never heard someone responding to their mother or their father by huh, or what, or whatever,
or you lie,
or being angry and saying I hate you, or calling them liars. You never had that. It did not exist in our culture. Outside the African American culture, it was common, and we were shocked and appalled by that. As the cultures began to integrate, the disrespect that existed in those cultures began to saturate, creep in, and ultimately saturate our culture until the culture is blended, and now we have a situation where the youth, the discipline has been removed, and now the youth have become so disrespectful that it's created a market for their planned child prisons, or the politically correct term is youth detention centers. You know, in the 50s and 60s, we didn't have to have prisons for our children. Our children were disciplined and under control. So when you take an environment that's basically disrespectful, You know, even when we argued, I would wait until you finished saying what you had to say. And then I would counter with my perspective and the reason for my perspective. I wouldn't cut you off while you were talking. But see, now, it's considered politically acceptable. When we look at our leaders in the Parliament, in the Senates, in the Congress, in the Houses of Commons, we see them rudely making noise when someone else is talking, when they don't agree with what's being said. We see them rudely cutting off, booing, and using disrespectful terminology. And we say that's politically acceptable, and now that's created a standard that exists throughout society now. So now for a society that's been conditioned to become disrespectful over the years, over the decades, for them to look at a society, at a culture where respect exists, where honor exists, where appreciation and love is openly demonstrated, they don't have the framework to internalize that. So that becomes something that they have to put a label on, and they've created a label for that. They call leadership in that environment carte blanche. They call that, oh, a dictator must produce that. And because we see the examples, and unfortunately we have examples of this now, because we see examples like what we see in the Middle East, where the people come out of oppression, and you see them with great jubilation and exuberance as they see what they anticipate as intervention coming, only to have that planned intervention turn and those people shoot and kill them and torture them, arrest and beat and torture them. And so from the West, they look at that and say, see how these people behave? It's not even natural. So the fact that we are jubilant when we receive our leaders, they put it in that same context. They look at all the exuberance as the same, and they look at, they use their model and say that this is the environment that enables this, that causes this to be a reality. So they don't have the framework to understand it. In Gambia, it's nothing like that. In Gambia, the people have, those who have memory of the previous administrations, those people remember the days when in the country there were less than 20 educational institutions. Only 3 high schools in 1994. They remember those days. They remember when you couldn't even dream of completing your education, let alone going to college, because there was no university in the Gambia. They remember those days, and they look at the opportunities today, and they're exuberant, they're zealous, they aspire and dream, they're thankful for the opportunities, they're eager to protect and preserve it, and to show appreciation for the leader and administration that caused it to be a reality. Well, again, this kind of development, this kind of people-oriented development is not a reality outside. You know, outside they're talking about gender equality and gender balance, and the people who are making these guidelines don't even have it in their own countries. Look at the record here. When the current administration took over, girls couldn't even go to school. One of the first things they did was mandated them to go to school to be educated. Now, 17 years later, they're educated and a vibrant part of every sector of society, from administration to the military, the educational system, on down. You know, we've gone, the contrasts are prolific. You know, we've gone from a selfish, exclusive colonial successor government of 30 years to a selfless, inclusive one. We've gone from a tribe-based government to an all-tribes one. We've gone from an iron-walled, corrupt government to a transparent, corruption-purging one. We've gone from a gender-biased, chauvinistic government to a gender-inclusive, merit-based one. We've gone from an uneducated nation of less than 20 institutions, including the 3 high schools, to an increasingly educated one. So when we look at the record, 17 years later,